Hi, and welcome to another presentation from your business tutor, learning your way, anytime, anywhere. When an organisation decides on its management structure or is thinking about altering it, one of the most important issues to consider is how many staff managers should directly supervise. In fact, a considerable amount of research has been undertaken by management consultants on this very subject. And this is why spans of control is the topic of this presentation. So what are we going to learn in today's presentation? Well, first of all, we're going to find out what a span of control is. After that, we're going to identify the difference between a wide and a narrow span of control. And then finally, we're going to look at the advantages and disadvantages of wide and narrow spans of control. Okay, let's get started with our first question, which is, what is a span of control? Span of control refers to the number of employees a manager directly supervises. Usually, a span of control is described as being either wide or narrow. If it is wide, a manager directly supervises a large number of people, which can be seen in the diagram shown. Whereas, if a manager supervises only a few employees, they are said to have a narrow span of control. Okay, so let's now move on to our second question and ask, what are the advantages of a wide span of control? In an organisation that has wide spans of control, fewer managers are needed to supervise staff. For example, when wide spans are used, one manager may only be needed to supervise 12 staff. Whereas if narrow spans were used, 4 managers may be needed to supervise that same number of staff. This clearly has a benefit in terms of reduced staffing costs, as managers can be paid a considerable amount of money. Another advantage of a wide span of control is that it encourages managers to delegate responsibility to employees. This is because if they did not, they would get bogged down making all the decisions referred to them by staff. 2 benefits arise from this. First, the manager frees up their time to make the important decisions and complete their own work. But also, delegating responsibility and decision-making power to staff can be motivating, as it gives them more control over their jobs. This also helps to build trust in the organisation, as it shows management have faith in their employees to make good decisions. Linked to this, delegation provides staff with development opportunities. It gives them an insight into what is expected in a promoted post, and hence better prepares them for that challenge. So let's now turn and ask, what are the disadvantages of a wide span of control? One of the biggest issues with using wide spans of control is that managers do not have a lot of time to support staff, as they are supervising so many employees. This can be a major problem because using a wide span of control usually involves managers delegating responsibility and tasks. Now, this can be problematic if the task being delegated is complicated or the employee is inexperienced. This is because in both these situations, the employee will require significant support from their manager, which given the wide span of control may not be available. As you would expect, this can cause major issues. For example, employees may become overwhelmed and are unable to complete the work they were delegated. Or equally as bad, without support, their inexperience leads to poor decisions being made. A final disadvantage of a wide span of control can occur when managers abuse their position and delegate too much responsibility to their staff. This can create excessive stress for the employees, which can be demoralising and can result in good staff leaving your business. Let's now move on and look at the pros and cons of a narrow span of control. So let's start with, what are the advantages of a narrow span of control? The key advantage of a narrow span of control is that it allows a manager to supervise and support their staff effectively. As we already know, this is really important when the employee being supervised is inexperienced, or the work that is being undertaken by the employee is complicated. In both these instances, employees will require considerable support to do their job effectively, which a narrow span of control allows a manager to do. A second associated advantage is that because a manager has time to supervise their employees, they are better able to keep an eye on the quality of work produced by each employee. This is important from a number of perspectives. First, it makes sure work is completed to a high standard. But it also allows a manager to identify who is performing to a good level and who is struggling. This is important information to know, because if an employee is doing well, it may indicate that they can be delegated more complicated work, or that they are ready for promotion. Whereas if they are having difficulties, it may indicate they require further support and training to improve their work performance. Of course, there are also disadvantages of a narrow span of control, which we will now look at. Problems with a narrow span of control usually occur due to poor management. First, some managers abuse their ability to closely supervise employees by putting too much pressure on their staff. They set overly challenging targets and then constantly check how close employees are to achieving them. Staff are so tightly controlled that they feel they have no room to breathe. This loss of control of their work often makes staff feel undervalued and demotivated. Linked to this first issue is the problem of micromanaging. This is where supervising managers insist that every task is done exactly as they say, and that every decision must go through them. In other words, staff are just there to follow instructions. For many employees, stripping them of responsibility and control is completely demoralising, especially for those staff that are experienced or want to contribute ideas. In fact, treating staff like robots who are merely there to follow instructions is likely to see many talented staff leave your organisation. So what did we learn in this presentation? Well, first of all, we found out what a span of control is. Thereafter, we went on to identify the difference between a wide and a narrow span of control. And then finally, we looked at the advantages and disadvantages of wide and narrow spans of control. As you have probably worked out, there is no one right answer to the question, what is the ideal size for a span of control? However, when deciding which size is most appropriate, the key issue to be considered is supervisory burden. This is the amount of time a manager needs to spend supervising and supporting their staff to ensure work is completed effectively. The factors which influence how much supervisory burden a manager has are influenced by the work undertaken by the employees being supervised. For example, are the tasks being completed by employees separate from each other, or do they need to be coordinated? Are the tasks straightforward and repetitive, or are they complicated? And finally, are the tasks similar to the work undertaken by the manager, or are they different? If the tasks undertaken by employees do not need to be coordinated, are simple and repetitive, and are similar to the managers, then the supervisory burden is low, and a wide span of control can be used. However, If the manager's supervisory burden is calculated as being high, then a narrow span of control should be used.